They had her name on the VIP table. They just didn't expect the woman it belonged to would actually show up. "Ma'am, this area is for executive guests only," the maitre d' said, his voice polite in tone, but sharp with dismissal. Celeste Monroe didn't flinch. She glanced down at the table again. C. Monroe, 7:30 p.m., polished brass plaque. Her name, her reservation, but apparently not her face. The hostess had barely looked up when she walked in. Black woman, simple navy pantsuit, no visible jewelry, no man beside her. To them, she wasn't a VIP, she was a mistake. "We had a scheduling shift," the maitre d' added quickly, "but we'd be happy to seat you near the bar, more casual, less formal." Celeste said nothing. Across the room, she watched two white executives being led straight to the table she had reserved, where her name still sat. They were already ordering wine. The server bowed. Napkins folded across laps, and there she stood, alone. A ghost in a room she paid for. She reached into her purse, pulled out her phone. Click. A single photo, the nameplate, the new guests. The maitre d's strained smile. She put the phone away. Then came the smile. Not warm, not angry, just inevitable. "Thank you," she said, calm and clear. "I won't be dining tonight." She turned slowly and walked out. Every step measured, deliberate. The kind of walk only someone with absolute power could afford. The maitre d' watched her leave, relieved he'd handled the situation. He didn't know that in 10 minutes, that woman, the one he dismissed as not belonging, would quietly trigger a $740 million capital freeze that would choke his entire hospitality group from the inside. "Tell us where you're watching from. Have you ever been judged before they even knew your name? Stick around. This one's about to flip everything." Celeste Monroe didn't come from money. She came from Atlanta's South Side, where single moms raised daughters like her with grit and grace, where making it out didn't mean fame. It meant survival. She earned her first scholarship at 11, graduated top of her class, then Stanford, then Wharton. While her peers chased corner offices, Celeste chased a vision no one else could see, a future where ethics weren't optional in business. She didn't just talk about impact, she designed the system to measure it. Her firm, Verdant Trust, started as a whisper in a shared workspace. Now it managed $8.1 billion in ESG capital, making or breaking companies based on how they treated people, not just shareholders. And for industries that prided themselves on luxury, fashion, hospitality, private aviation, Verdant wasn't just an investor, it was the gatekeeper. But Celeste's true legacy wasn't the money. It was the code behind it. 10 years ago, she quietly led a team of data scientists, behavioral economists, and civil rights lawyers to create what is now known in global finance as the EthosCore Index, a real-time ethical scoring system adopted by 61 financial institutions and counting. It didn't just track carbon emissions or board diversity. It measured how a company behaved when no one was looking, who got hired, who got heard, who got humiliated. And tonight, in that dimly lit Michelin-starred dining room in Geneva, EthosCore was watching. What the maitre d' saw was a black woman who didn't fit the room. What he missed was the architect of the very system his restaurant depended on for survival. Celeste didn't need to cause a scene. She didn't need to yell. All she needed was 10 quiet minutes to mark his entire empire as non-compliant. And once that happened, it wouldn't just be the restaurant that paid. It would be every property, every investor, every partner. One signature, one flag, one silent consequence at a time. "You said her name was Monroe?" The younger hostess glanced at the maitre d'. She looked nervous, but not sorry. He just shrugged. There's no way that woman was C. Monroe, not in that outfit. The servers chuckled quietly, pretending not to laugh too loud. One leaned in and whispered, "I thought she was a personal assistant, not the actual client." What they didn't know, what they didn't even bother to ask, was that Celeste Monroe had reserved that table herself through a private assistant, with a company card linked to a hospitality account that billed more in 1/4 than the restaurant grossed in a year. But none of that mattered when they looked at her. They didn't see a client. They saw an inconvenience, a mistake that had walked in wearing confidence and dark skin. 2 minutes later, the table marked C. Monroe was now hosting a pair of white businessmen in tailored suits. A server poured their wine and bent so low it was nearly comical. Meanwhile, Celeste was already gone, having slipped out the door with no raised voice, no argument, and no drama, which only made it worse. Because now, without a scene, there was no excuse. The maitre d' still felt proud. "We handled that cleanly," he said, dusting his lapels. He didn't notice the woman near the bar who had recorded everything. He didn't notice the server who took a picture of the reservation list showing Celeste's name. He didn't see the silent fallout already unfolding behind the scenes. And most of all, he didn't realize that the woman he'd just removed from that table wasn't just someone. She was the reason they had funding to exist. That nameplate? It didn't just mark a dinner reservation. It marked the beginning of their downfall. Celeste didn't storm out of the restaurant. She walked, calm, composed, like someone who knew the moment wasn't over. It was just changing locations. She stepped into the cool Geneva air, crossed the marble courtyard without turning back, and slid into the back seat of her waiting car. "Home, Ms. Monroe?" her driver asked gently. Celeste didn't answer right away. She pulled out her phone. Face ID blinked. Unlocked. She tapped into an app that didn't have a name, only a clean green icon with a single white leaf. A private access tool linked to Verdant Trust's compliance override system. She scrolled down until she saw the restaurant's name and its parent company. Then, with the precision of someone who had done this before, she tapped Initiate Ethics Review, Tier 1. A red flag appeared next to the listing. Then came the follow-up screen. "Would you like to trigger public visibility within EthosCore Partner Network?" Celeste stared at the question. A lesser version of her might have said no. Let them stew in silence. Let them guess. But silence had never protected anyone like her. She tapped. Yes, public flag. The system asked for a reason. She typed, Tier 1 violation, discriminatory denial of service to ESG registered stakeholder. Incident documented, time-stamped, witnesses present, photo and video available upon request. She hit send. It was done. That fast. In the time it took for the maitre d' to finish bragging to his staff, the restaurant's ESG rating had dropped below compliance threshold, and within minutes, alerts would hit inboxes across 5 time zones. Investment firms, banks, booking platforms, hospitality alliances. A silent domino, already falling. Celeste put the phone down, leaned back. She didn't need to scream. She didn't need a headline. She just needed them to underestimate the wrong woman. One last time. The maitre d' slept soundly that night. He thought he had handled it well. No scene, no shouting, no customer complaint logged in the system. That woman had left quietly. Problem solved. Nothing to report by 7:00 a.m. The next morning, his name was flagged in an internal incident log he didn't even know existed. And by 8:12 a.m., his employer, the general manager of Maison Etienne, one of Geneva's most exclusive dining establishments, received a confidential email marked urgent. Ethics breach confirmation. Level 1. Attached was the photo. The nameplate, C. Monroe, 7:30 p.m. The 2 white executives at the table. The timestamp. Then came the words that made the GM's stomach drop. This incident has been flagged by the original architect of the EthosCore Index. Compliance status has been downgraded to non-compliant pending investigation. All ESG-linked capital allocations will be paused effective immediately. Partner institutions have been notified. It didn't take long for the chain reaction to begin. By 9 o'clock a.m., 3 ESG-aligned investment funds froze $280 in active capital connected to the parent company that owned Maison Etienne and 4 boutique hotels across Europe. By noon, a Japanese travel conglomerate, one of their biggest booking partners, canceled its seasonal group contract, citing brand values misalignment. By 4:30 p.m., a luxury airline lounge partnership pulled its co-branding from the hotel's flagship property in Zurich. And by the end of the week, $740 million in ESG capital had been frozen, 4 strategic partnerships collapsed, and investor confidence sank to the lowest it had been in 5 years. All over a dinner table. No press release had gone out. No lawsuits, no angry tweets, just a quiet flag in the right system, seen by the right people. The CEO of the hospitality group, Etienne Laurent, stared blankly at the data streaming across his private dashboard. Graphs plunging, notifications piling up, legal teams scrambling. He turned to his chief risk officer. "What the hell happened?" The officer didn't answer. He just slid a tablet across the table. On screen was a paused video still. A black woman standing beside a VIP table, her name clearly visible on a plaque, her posture calm but firm. "That's Celeste Monroe," the CRO finally said. "She's the architect behind the compliance framework we use to maintain our ESG credentials. She also controls the single largest ESG fund backing our portfolio." Etienne went pale. "Why didn't anyone tell me she was dining with us?" The CRO looked down. "Apparently. We kicked her out before she ever sat down." Somewhere across the city, in a penthouse overlooking Lake Geneva, Celeste sat quietly, legs crossed, tea in hand. Her assistant stood beside her. "It's begun," the assistant said. "Verdant's capital has pulled. EthosCore partners followed. Internal memos are flying everywhere. No one knows who gave the order." Celeste looked out at the lake, calm as ever. "They'll know soon enough," she said softly. "But by then, it won't matter." She wasn't angry. She wasn't vengeful. She was precise. She knew that outrage faded. Headlines moved on. But reputation, once shattered in the right circles, never really recovered. And in the world Celeste operated in, silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. By the end of the 3rd day, the hospitality group's press team was in full meltdown. Phone calls from board members, panicked emails from banks, a growing list of clients asking why their bookings had disappeared from platforms without explanation. The restaurant, Maison Etienne, was only the match. But the dry field around it, that was the group's outdated culture. And now it was burning, fast. In their Geneva office, executives scrambled to contain the damage. "Can we reverse the rating? Who do we speak to at EthosCore? Can someone apologize, quietly?" But no one had answers, because the person who triggered it wasn't just using the system, she built it. In investor circles, the whispers had started to turn into quiet exits. 2 private banks quietly withdrew $120 million in commitments. A Swiss pension fund removed the group from its ethical investment list. And most quietly damaging of all, Verdant Trust issued a statement. It was just 2 lines. Simple, polite, deadly. Verdant Trust confirms an active disassociation from any holding or institution currently flagged as non-compliant under the EthosCore Index. We will continue to monitor systemic alignment with our values. No name, no drama, but everyone knew who they meant. Back at Maison Etienne, the maitre d' who had started it all was still unaware of the storm unfolding. He served wine. He greeted guests. He laughed with a regular, until a senior manager pulled him aside. "You're being put on leave, effective immediately." "What? Why?" The manager didn't answer, didn't need to. The maitre d' didn't understand how one misjudgment at one table could destroy so much. He didn't see a system falling apart, but Celeste did, and she planned every quiet second of it. Etienne Laurent hadn't slept in 36 hours. The CEO of Levant Hospitality Group, owner of Maison Etienne and a dozen elite European properties, had watched his empire unravel faster than he could schedule a damage control call. 3 investment firms had pulled their funding. 2 international partners had terminated alliances. His CFO had just resigned. But none of that scared him more than the question everyone kept whispering behind closed doors. Do you even know who she is? She, the woman, the one from the dinner table. Find her, he barked at his executive assistant. Who was she? Who made the reservation? Who pulled the trigger on EthosCore? They pulled the booking data. Name, Celeste Monroe. Company, Verdant Trust. Title, not listed. Etienne stared at the screen. Something about the name tickled a distant memory, something recent. He opened his inbox and searched. There it was. Subject, EthosCore Compliance Summit, Speaker Roster. Attached was a dossier. Top figures in ESG oversight. Thought leaders. Architects of regulatory frameworks. Second name on the list, Dr. Celeste Monroe, CEO, Verdant Trust. Lead architect, EthosCore Index. Advisor to 6 ESG rating boards. Net influence, 8.1B in active sustainable capital. Etienne dropped his tablet. The room went silent. That woman wasn't just powerful, she was the system. Within hours, the story spread through private finance channels. Then media picked up whispers. A tweet from an anonymous insider at a Swiss ethics fund read, Geneva's golden boys denied service to the woman who built the platform they depend on. Another post showed a screenshot of the reservation plaque. C. Monroe, 7:30 p.m., still visible behind 2 white executives sipping wine. A video followed. Short, blurry, but enough. Celeste standing at the table, calm, dignified, silent. The comments exploded. She didn't yell, she didn't cry, she just walked out and watched them burn. This is what power looks like when it doesn't need a microphone. Inside Maison Etienne, the maitre d' finally understood. The senior manager who had placed him on leave didn't say much, but the new rumor was clear. You didn't just disrespect a guest. You disrespected the person who writes the rules now. He wanted to believe it was all blown out of proportion, but the headlines piling up said otherwise. 740 million in ESG capital frozen after ethics breach at elite Swiss restaurant. Anonymous source confirms involvement of EthosCore architect, the woman behind the quiet collapse of a hospitality giant. Meanwhile, Celeste said nothing. Not to the press, not on social media, not in boardrooms. She didn't need to. Because the moment the world realized who had been sitting at that table, it changed the way they looked at every woman who came after her. No one wanted to be the next Maison Etienne. No one wanted to be the next headline. And most of all, no one wanted to misjudge the next Celeste Monroe. 3 weeks later, the marble conference room inside the Geneva World Finance Tower was unusually full. Not for a press conference, not for a scandal response. This was something bigger, a reckoning. On the projection screen, bold white text hovered on a navy blue background. EthosCore alignment, Phase 2, mandatory protocol implementation. Beneath that, presented by Verdant Trust. The room was silent as Celeste Monroe stepped forward, holding no notes. She didn't need any. She wasn't here to negotiate. She was here to declare. Her voice was calm, clear, and entirely free of apology. The recent violation in Geneva was not an isolated failure, she began. It was a mirror, a reflection of what happens when compliance becomes a checkbox instead of a culture. She paused. Let that hang. So here's what's changing, starting today. Celeste then announced the rollout of the Celeste Accord, a binding ethics framework designed for every hospitality group, investment fund, and service brand operating under ESG financing structures. It wasn't optional. Any company hoping to retain access to ESG capital via Verdant Trust or any EthosCore partner fund would be required to sign and enforce the following: comprehensive staff training on bias recognition and equitable service, Real-time behavioral monitoring tools integrated into reservation and CRM systems. Third-party audits of customer service interactions quarterly. Whistleblower protection policies for frontline employees reporting bias. Leadership-level accountability reviews. Every 6 months, without exception. The penalty for non-compliance? Immediate capital freeze and revocation of ESG eligibility for a minimum of 12 months. The crowd of suits, mostly male, mostly pale, shifted in their seats. Celeste let them. She didn't sugarcoat it. She didn't coddle. "If you can't serve people with dignity," she said simply, "then you don't deserve the dignity of our capital." Behind the scenes, the reactions were fast. Some CEOs scoffed. Some texted their legal teams, but most quietly nodded. Because they knew the truth. Celeste hadn't needed a lawsuit. She didn't call for protests or public takedowns. All she did was show them what silence plus systems plus receipts could do. The CEO of Levant Hospitality officially stepped down the following week. Maison Etienne, rebranded, retrained, and publicly signed. The Celeste Accord, front page of Le Monde, and in boardrooms across Europe, Asia, and the US. Ethics officers added one more item to every upcoming meeting agenda. Are we Celeste compliant? Back in her office, Celeste looked out over Lake Geneva, sipping her black coffee. Her assistant entered with a smile. 3 more groups asked to license the Accord this morning, and someone sent flowers. No note, just a single card that said, "You moved a mountain by sitting still." Celeste raised an eyebrow, then smirked. Cute, probably from someone nervous. She didn't smile because she'd won. She smiled because they finally understood. This wasn't revenge. It was realignment. It started in whispers. A hotel manager in Rome canceled a lunch meeting with a longtime supplier. He wanted to review training protocols. A boutique concierge director in Paris quietly swapped out his entire front desk team. In Madrid, a maitre d' who had never heard of Verdant Trust pulled his staff into a closed-door meeting and said, "From now on, we serve every guest like they own the building." No one said the name out loud, but everyone knew who they were afraid of. They called it the Geneva effect. It didn't spread through the media. It spread through email chains, back-channel investor calls, and internal memos marked confidential. Verify all ESG-linked reservation logs. Cross-check client tier tags against EthosCore registration. Do not dismiss guests based on appearance. Non-negotiable. One luxury hospitality consultant said it best during a seminar in Singapore. You don't know who she's trained. You don't know who's watching. So, act like she's always in the room. Meanwhile, Celeste wasn't making any public appearances. No interviews. No op-eds. She didn't need to, because her silence had already become policy. At Maison Etienne, where it all began, the new manager walked the floor every night. And every night, someone would glance at table 6. It looked just like the others. Linen cloth, polished silver, soft candlelight. But to the staff, it had a name they didn't dare speak. A name that no longer needed a reservation tag. C. Monroe. Because that was the table that changed everything. Etienne Laurent was no longer CEO. There was no press conference, no dramatic headlines, just a sterile corporate statement, leadership transition in progress. But everyone inside the industry knew he'd been removed. In his final week, Etienne made one unannounced visit to the Zurich headquarters. No one asked him to. He just showed up. No driver, no assistant. Just a quiet man in a dark coat, walking into the building he once ruled. He didn't go to the boardroom or his corner office. Instead, he headed for the private lounge tucked near the rear exit, a room reserved for confidential conversations. That same room where, weeks earlier, Celeste Monroe had stood in silence and changed everything. The furniture hadn't moved. The small wooden table still bore a faint ring from a wine glass. He sat down, and then, slowly, reached into the inside pocket of his coat. He pulled out a folded, crumpled sheet of paper. It was worn from being handled too many times. He placed it on the table in front of him. It was the reservation confirmation from that night, typed in small black font. C. Monroe, 7:30 p.m. Confirmed. A red pen had once circled the last line. Cancelled by host. Etienne stared at it for a long while. He didn't speak. No one else was there. But in that silence, something shifted. His expression wasn't defensive. It wasn't angry. It was the look of a man who once believed he controlled the room, and now knew he never even understood who was in it. Across the city, Celeste Monroe was prepping for a round table with 3 young women founders from South Africa. Her assistant entered quietly. 11 new companies just requested early-stage EthosCore audits. Voluntarily. Celeste nodded without looking up. Good. Let them learn early. Dignity in service isn't an extra. It's the baseline. Back at Maison Etienne, Table 6 remained untouched. No one booked it. No one assigned it. It wasn't marked. No nameplate. No plaque. But every staff member knew that chair was hers. And no one was entitled to it anymore. It didn't happen overnight. But something had changed. First came the calls. From global brands. From silent competitors. From government departments wanting to understand the framework better. Then came the replication. A luxury travel group in Dubai. An art auction house in New York. A private aviation company in Hong Kong. All requesting training, all asking the same thing. Can we license the Celeste Accord and Verdant Trust? It didn't just grow. It transformed. Within 6 months, over 61 ESG-aligned institutions had voluntarily adopted EthosCore's full compliance model. Not because they were forced to, because reputation had become currency, and Celeste Monroe's signature now carried weight far beyond capital. At a major summit in Singapore, a veteran hotelier whispered to a peer, "Forget blacklists. These days, the scariest thing is silence from Verdant." But while the world shifted, Celeste stayed silent. Publicly, at least. She didn't post on LinkedIn. She didn't grant interviews. She didn't campaign for awards. Instead, she showed up in rooms that used to ignore her and watched people adjust their posture. One evening, at a global hospitality roundtable in Vienna, a man who once dismissed her at a gala approached with hesitation. "Ms. Monroe," he said carefully, "I owe you an apology." Celeste looked up from her water glass, calm. "I don't accept apologies without action." He nodded humbly, then handed her a signed copy of their board's new ethics resolution, built on the Accord framework. He wasn't groveling. He was acknowledging. Celeste took the paper. "That I accept." Meanwhile, stories began to surface. An elderly black couple received personal escorts to their suite at a hotel that once faced racial bias complaints. A young woman wearing a hijab was offered the front row seat at a luxury spa seminar. Not overlooked, but invited. A former flight attendant shared anonymously, "When we asked for a code to follow, now we have one." Celeste watched all this from a distance. She never said, "I told you so." She didn't need to. Because when you build a system powerful enough to rewrite what people believe is possible, you don't have to fight anymore. They start fighting to meet your standard. One rainy evening in Geneva, Celeste took a call from her mentor, Daria Okoye. Daria chuckled from Lagos. "Do you even realize what you've done?" Celeste smiled softly. "I didn't do anything they weren't ready for." "You didn't need to. That's the genius," Daria replied. "You built the expectation. Now they're chasing it." Back in her office, Celeste opened her laptop. A new dashboard update blinked. 78% of licensed organizations now meeting gold ethics threshold under the Accord. She stared at it for a while, then whispered to herself, "Good, but not enough. Not yet." Because this was never about revenge. It was about rewriting what respect looks like, in suits, in service, in silence. And that kind of legacy, it doesn't wear out. It multiplies. There's a small card tucked inside the maitre d's desk at Maison Etienne. It's not on any booking list. It's not visible to customers. but the staff know it's there. It says simply, Table 6, reserved, no name required. No one sits there. No one asks why. Because in the weeks and months since that night, the story spread, not just as gossip, but as quiet scripture. The woman who didn't raise her voice changed the industry. And everyone knows Table 6 is where it all started. Some evenings, a new server will ask, "Should we reset Table 6 tonight?" The manager just gives a soft nod. Polished silverware, a single candle, clean linen, nothing fancy, but nothing forgotten. Because it isn't just a table anymore. It's a reminder of what happens when you look someone in the eye and decide they don't belong, and what can happen when that someone writes the rules you now live by. Celeste Monroe never returned to Maison Etienne. She didn't need to, because the mark she left wasn't carved in wood. It was carved in memory, in policy, in compliance codes, in the uncomfortable pauses that now happen in boardrooms before someone says, "Let's be sure we're treating every guest fairly." Remember what happened in Geneva? The candle at Table 6 still flickers some nights. A quiet flame, no name, no fuss. But everyone in the room knows who it's for. What about you? Have you ever been judged before they even knew who you were? Or maybe you've seen someone silently rise above it, like Celeste did. Tell us your story in the comments. We read every single one. And if this reminded you of someone who needs to hear it, share it with them. Because sometimes one table, one moment of quiet dignity is all it takes to shift the whole room. We'll see you next time. And until then, stay bold, stay kind, and never underestimate the power of stillness.